This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivex.org.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of State of the Project Ember. I'm your host Cryptosi, and this podcast is all about a very special project called Ember. This is the second in the series because Ember is a brand new project, and I am joined by Ember's lead developer, a man who goes by the name of Kayaba. Kayaba, good evening, and how are you?
Great. I'm very excited to be back here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I'm delighted to have you on our podcast again. So could you just give us a brief, people should know, but could you just give us a brief description of your role within Ember?
Sure. So as you said, I'm the lead developer. So I'm in charge of getting the code done, kind of setting the path as we move forward here up until launch, and making sure Ember launches in general.
Okay, brilliant. Right, so we'll jump straight in. For those of you who are not up to date, it would be a great idea to go back and listen to our first State of the Project Ember, which was released at the beginning of December, and this one's being released at the beginning of January 2019. And bring yourself up to date. And there's also a bi-weekly blog post on Medium, which is very, very interesting and has got loads of great information about the project. Right, so the first question that I've got for you, Kayaba, is, are you considering privacy options for Ember, something like CoinJoin or Snarks, if they're not too slow?
So CoinJoin isn't actually a privacy protocol. It doesn't actually hide any of the balances or the senders or the receivers. What it does is it groups senders and it groups their transactions, so you can't tell who actually sent it. You can just say one of these people sent it. And then with Snarks and the recently talked about Starks, Snarks is fully private. And then Starks is a more complex version, which is also fully private, but it's a bit more complex because it has some additional features. But as it's more complex, there's no cryptocurrency using it because it's just not feasible for a cryptocurrency. It takes too long. It involves too much data. So we are looking into Snarks because it is fully private and it doesn't require quote unquote batching because we don't have standard blocks. Transactions are handled instantly. So if we batch it, that means transactions are no longer instant. So we can definitely look into optionally batching it for privacy. It's not something we'd like to do. So we're definitely looking into Snark.
Yeah, did you say Snarks or Starks?
Snarks is fully private, and Starks is basically Snarks, but it doesn't have what's called the trusted setup. With Snarks,
right,
either a person or a group of people create data, and if you had a full copy of that data, so if you got 10 people to do it and one person deleted their copy, you're fine. But if you got a full copy of that data, you can reveal all the data on the transactions. Nothing is private anymore. With Starks, they don't have that, but it's much slower and takes up much more data. So we are looking into Starks, even though it has the setup, because it can actually be used in a cryptocurrency. It's fast enough to do it, it's fully private, and it doesn't require batching. That said, due to the complexity, it would put us back at least a couple of months. So we're not likely to do it on the mainnet release. It would be a hard fork 6 months to a year on. We've also been looking into Zero Coin, which is another option, even though it isn't as private, and RingCT, but RingCTs require batching, so that's not a preference of ours. And then finally, as you said at the start, there is CoinJoin. So CoinJoin, again, it isn't private, it just has a bunch of people, it groups a bunch of senders and has them send to each other's recipients, so you can't tell which sender meant to send to which recipient. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't require any hard fork. We can release this a month on as an optional add-on. So we can release Ember, do the work, and when it's ready, a month or 3 months in or however long it takes, we can release this without a hard fork and you can just opt into it. So we like it just because it's a lot simpler, so it means we can get it up, and it would be used as a stopgap. Until we actually decided on a more private mechanism, decided if we do want that privacy. And I would like privacy. Privacy is a great thing and a critical thing. it's just not something we're looking at for launch.
Okay, that does make quite a lot of sense. Also, another thing which I wonder if you're considering is that the privacy protocols as they are, they're moving forward still quite rapidly. So I guess if you don't make a decision on something as integral to the structure of the network, something like snarks, if you go for something like CoinJoin, then I guess when something better does come along, maybe in 6 months, a year or 2 years' time, you're in a better position to implement something like that without having to pull the network apart. Would you say that that's a consideration that you've taken?
Definitely. It would be horrible to implement, just to grab one out of thin air, ring CT, and then switch to snarks later on, because we'd have to keep both sets of code alive so you could validate the earlier blockchain as you sync through it. And then if ring CT is broken, all that is revealed. Whatever we pick, we want to be able to use for years.
Yep. Okay, moving on. The second question is something that plenty of people in the Ember Discord, I'll put a link to the Ember Discord in the description, but plenty of people within the Ember Discord and the Bitcoin Talk thread have been asking what your plans are for exchange integrations. So what sort of exchanges are you aiming to go for, and what kind of strategy have you got for getting Ember onto exchanges?
So we've actually been in talk with multiple exchanges, some newer. So they're not all small exchanges. One of them is actually prepped to be a very big exchange. And some of them aren't even released yet, which gives us a nice opportunity, because even if they're going to be big, they're not big yet. They're a lot more accepting of small projects because they're still a small project themselves because they have yet to launch. So we've been talking with a few. One has been kind enough to say that they like the project and they might, of course, it's all subject to change, but they might even be willing to forego the listing fee because Ember seems up their alley. So we are planning to get Ember on exchange within just a couple of weeks of launch. We'll likely have support with an exchange at launch, but they'll want to wait a few weeks to make sure the network's secure and we're not going to reboot it or anything.
Okay, excellent. It's good to know that you've got that well in hand. My next question is a follow-up, actually, from the bi-weekly blog that I spoke about earlier. It's a blog post that comes out from the Ember core team, and it's packed with information. But I wanted to ask you what is the current state of planning for the network? I know Ember's not quite yet in mainnet, but how far are you within the testnet, and what's the plan for the testnets moving forward?
So I do write those blog posts. So that would be this member of the core team, actually.
Okay.
I want to attach a signature, but of course it does go beyond me and someone else will at some point. So
yeah.
So recently we've been working on what's called the verifications redo. There's been this major piece of work on the consensus mechanism where verifications, or votes, as you might want to call them in layman's terms, they used to be directly on the blockchain. But since we handled them in real time as they're voted on, this means that we were downloading them twice, and that was a severe bottleneck for our systems. So we're now saving them when we get them in real time to a database, and then the blockchain just contains references. So instead of saying, here's a vote, here's a vote, here's a vote, it says, here's the voter, and here's the number, like the vote number A, the vote number B, the vote number C. And it means we don't have to double download. It makes blocks a lot smaller. So that's what we've been working on. And it's such a huge change. It's taken us weeks. It's really just breaking apart the code base. And it's been on its own branch, of course. So you can still compile master. It's not like this experimental work has been done on the main branch. So because of it, when it's finished, which we're looking at just a couple of days now, we're going to have a 1-day testnet just to make sure it works. I wouldn't call it the testnet 2. I might want to call it a 1.5, just because it doesn't contain a lot of the changes I wanted in the second testnet. It really just contains the verifications redo. And after that, we're going to go back from redoing our existing work to adding features, working on the database, network protocols, so on and so on. After that, we're going to have our second testnet. So this developers testnet 2.0, because it's not actually the second, it's 2.0, it's only going to be developers. You still have to compile your own node. It's our way of limiting the people who aren't fully technical, because as much as I like them, their Ember's not ready. We'd be getting a lot of complaints about usability when really we're looking for does it work or does it not work? Not is it friendly to work? We'll ask if it's friendly to use, not friendly to work, but is it friendly to use likely around February when we actually have HTML and CSS put in there. Right now, we're just focusing, can you send transactions? Is it fast? So on, so on. So yes, developers testnet 2.0, we're still going to have to compile your own node. We do it so we get more technical minded people, so we get the right kind of feedback. And that's likely going to be mid-January or at the end of January.
Okay, so any people who are capable of compiling their own nodes and getting that up and running should, I guess, go to the GitHub to find the code, and then for feedback in GitHub or Discord. What would you suggest?
They're more than welcome to create a GitHub issue, but if they joined our Discord, they could provide that feedback quicker. Just because I don't check GitHub 24/7, but I am almost always on Discord. They could also get feedback on help compiling the node. They could ask if it's an issue before they actually create the issue. This happened to me, not on Ember, thankfully, but on one of my projects. This guy created 3 issues, all for what weren't issues. Like one was like feedback, I think, and then 2 were just issues on his end. So as much as I appreciate it, it kind of annoyed me that it filled up the issues log. But of course, it still was feedback, and it was a guy using my code, so I still appreciated him. We've talked more since then. Pretty good dude. Happy I met him. But he did still fill up the issues log, which annoys me internally. Kind of hits my OCD like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's a good thing if these issues are probably handled in Discord, because even for the people who are not quite so technical, like myself, I'm not quite a technical enough to be known as a developer. But for people like me, it's good to watch you guys work and to watch the things being built. So it can become a bit of, I shouldn't say a spectacle or a show, but it's quite interesting to watch guys at work and watch, well, guys and girls, and watch you get into grips with the code and watch the network start to take shape. So for people who are not quite so technical, I don't think they should shy away from joining the Discord and lurking. Probably try not to open GitHub issues, as that might rub Kayaba up the wrong way.
Developer testnet, we didn't actually have just techie people join. No, we actually had some people that you wouldn't necessarily call developers get a node together and contribute. I mean, yes, they all had technical knowledge, but no, they wouldn't necessarily work as developers or be a hobbyist developer. So if you're interested and you are willing to learn, no, definitely, we can help you get set up if you're on the Discord. I'm not saying you have to be a developer to join. I'm saying you have to be more technically inclined. Developer testnet just sounds a lot better than technically inclined testnet.
Yeah, excellent.
It was off the tongue a bit faster.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think it's nice that the Ember community is quite welcoming to everybody, regardless of their levels of ability. Moving on, I noticed a small update on a previously developed Discord tip bot that you've got in GitHub, because I actually follow what you do in GitHub. So you made a small update to a Discord tip bot. It got me quite excited. Does that mean that there's going to be a tip bot in Discord for Ember?
So yes, we will have a Discord tip bot for Ember, but no, that update does not mean that. This tip bot, it's something I wrote a while ago for ERC-20s, or Ethereum tokens, and which I ended up changing or adding Bitcoin support as well before it became only Bitcoin, and now it's back to both Bitcoin and Ethereum tokens. So yes, I do plan on adding Ember support to it. You know, the tip bot's been running on multiple servers for a while, friends with some of the people who set it up on their own, and very well tested. Haven't had any bugs in years, I think, at this point, or critical bugs, I should say. But recently I was just fixing a minor Ethereum token bug. Hasn't had bugs in years, admits that there's a bug. Hasn't been critical bugs in a long time. It's fully secure. It just was sometimes crashing at startup due to the Ethereum nodes. So no, that the work I was doing does not signify anything related to Ember. But yes, I definitely will be setting it up in the Ember server once we release the mainnet. I mean, I might create a channel for it during a test net just to make sure it's working so we can get it there on day one. but it will likely be where you have to like get approved to actually test it out, because I don't want anyone complaining, where did my Ember go, you scammer, so on, when we delete the testnet.
Yeah, people can get a bit touchy when they lose their testnet tokens from time to time. We definitely want to avoid that at all possible costs. My next question, actually, I think you touched on it earlier. It was about the update to the Merkle library. I'll link the GitHub pull request in the description. But could you just give us a brief overview? I know you touched on it earlier. Could you give us a brief overview on what that pull request was actually about and how it impacts on the network?
Sure. So I did touch on the verifications redo earlier, but not specifically the Merkle library, although the Merkle library is because of the verifications redo. So this was some code done by a good friend of mine and developer named Qualclef. He's actually been working on the Ember Black Box, and he's a good friend of mine. I'm very happy to have him working with Ember. So he basically took our existing Merkle library and just completely redid it to make it faster. Or a Merkle tree is a way of saying, I have all these hashes. So let's say you have 10 transactions, and combining it to one hash, and then using a limited set of hashes. Instead of all 10, you can verify whether or not your hash is in there. It's used for saying, hey, here's a hash of every transaction done in this block. Hey, is my transaction in here? Here's 5 out of the 500 transactions. You can prove it now that you're in there. It's a very neat way for limited resource computers to keep up with the blockchain and verify that their transaction was included and so on. So my existing library, it wasn't used much, but basically it said, here's a group of transactions, here's the final hash, we're done. He really redid it to make it more flexible, and he enabled this really nice thing where instead of saying we're done, you can say, here's a Merkle tree, add a hash, which is nice because if you're mining a block, you might have 5 transactions at the start, but by the end you have 500. So now you don't have to create 500 different trees, you can just create one tree and add hashes as you go. So it's just really great for performance and clean code.
Yeah, that does sound like some great efficiencies that he's made there. For people who may not know, what sort of speeds are you planning on having Ember running at? What sort of transactions per second are you planning on having once the mainnet is up and up to full speed? And what sorts of speeds are you kind of seeing now? I know we're nowhere near the mainnet, but what sorts of speeds are you planning?
So we did have a sample. A sample is just a piece of code that uses a very limited set of Ember. So for example, one was a client sample, and it would just simulate another node to the limited point where you could send a transaction before we actually allowed sending transaction via your own node. It used to be it would only process transactions, not create transactions. So you actually had to spoof a client to create one. And then another sample might just be testing out the lattice. Another one just might be testing the blockchain. So we did have a sample, which was called TPS sample, and it tested quote unquote transactions per second. And the reason I put that in quotes is it didn't test voting, it didn't test mining, it only tested how many could you add to the lattice at once. And we did break 1,000. Of course, that was on a good machine, I'm not going to lie. It was on my gaming laptop, so... My hopes are that when we hit mainnet, we're going to be closer to 600 to 800 at launch, and we'll get that back up over 1,000 over the next year. Of course, it's fine to yell 1,000, but unless you actually have 1,000 people sending a transaction a second, it doesn't actually matter. If only 10 people are sending transactions, then you only need 10 TPS. But recently, this is actually why we redid verifications. I was doing the math, and if we had 32 megabyte blocks every 2 minutes, basically just a ridiculous amount of data in a ridiculous amount of time. Because 2-minute blocks aren't mad, but 32 megabytes in 2 minutes are. If we did that, we were still only getting 200 TPS as a theoretical maximum. Was definitely not a pretty number. So by redoing the verifications, we can actually get that back up to the 1,000. And just for anyone wondering, for the more technical-minded people who listen to this, when one transaction gets multiple votes, how we're planning from going from 1,000 to 600 to 800 at launch, when we're going from one transaction to one transaction plus votes. The 1,000 transactions per second was done on a single thread. And I'm hoping at launch we'll have multi-threading in there, which means we can process 5 things at once. So if we can process 1 transaction and 4 votes at once, it's going to be the same speed as 1 transaction. Of course, a vote is faster to process. So.
Excellent.
So yeah, we're going to be looking at 600 at launch and trying to go back over 1,000 as time goes on. And of course, you can always add a second layer. We could have our own version of Lightning Network, which would be more about load balancing than actually handling speed or fees. But you can definitely expand Ember.
Okay. Right. Thank you for that. This is my last question before I go into the community asked questions. So my last question is basically, are you pleased with the progress that you've made over the last month? From an outsider looking in, just via the activity that's been going on GitHub, it seems to be the busiest month you've had yet, which in terms of activity, which is even busier than the first month, which is quite rare for a crypto project. So how are you feeling about the progress that you've made over the last month?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
Well, I'm going to be honest, our Discord progress, or not Discord, but our GitHub progress over the last month hasn't been my favorite. It's been the holidays, and I know a lot of people have been very understanding on Discord, and truly, I really am loving our Discord community so far. The people in it have been great, but the amount of work I outputted this in December, it's not my favorite. I really just got distracted with the holidays. That said, the amount of business for the project has been done when it comes to talking to exchanges, putting out media, getting recognized, that has truly been great. And I truly have been liking that much. When it comes to the project, I will agree. This has been one of our best months because of all the work. But when it comes to our GitHub, probably not say December, probably likely our second month. Because I remember during our first month, I wasn't sure how fully committed I was going to be to Ember. I knew I was going to get it done, but I didn't know if I was going to take it as a part-time or full-time thing, and I was still working some other jobs. So yeah, if you actually go on our initial comment, it's kind of funny. The initial commit onto GitHub, it was about 3 days work, and the README just said currency. Didn't say Ember, didn't give a description, it just said currency. And it wasn't the best code. I've truly evolved Ember's code base over the last 6 months.
Well, you've got to start somewhere, Kayaba. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself. You've got to start somewhere. And I've seen worse README files than a single word. Sometimes less is more. You know, you were just being concise. I guess that's one way to look at it. You're being very concise.
It's a currency.
Right, so I'm going to move on now to the community questions. Now, if anybody listening to this podcast wants to ask a question for the next State of the Product Ember podcast or any others, they should just jump into the Ember Discord. I'll put the link in the description. And there is actually a State of the Project channel. Now, in that channel, you can put in any questions that you'd like to have featured in the podcast. I hang around in there sometimes. Kayaba's in there sometimes. There's a community manager named Memnon who's also in there. So it's just a great place to put your questions forward, and we'll pick them up. If they're good and relevant, we'll add them to the podcast in an upcoming episode. But the first question was,
just State of the Project is a monthly podcast. So if you're looking for a more instant answer, you might want to go to general. That said, it is nice to hear people talk about it, and Cryptosi always tries to advance the conversation. So if you do like this more vocal format, yeah, definitely go on State of the Project.
Yeah. But if it's something that you want to just speak about straight away, then we could also pick up questions from general as well. So it's much of a muchness, I guess. But
definitely.
Yeah, so let's move on to the community questions. And the first one was, do you plan on attending any conferences during the next few months? And if so, where?
I actually just bought my tickets a couple of nights ago. I am going to TabCon in Atlanta, USA, and it's this great conference. It's focusing more on developers rather than businesses, yet I'm sure some businesses will go there. And it's focusing on cryptocurrencies that have not done ICOs. So with Ember, yes, we did have a pre-mine. Someone actually shouted out like X not being the name of the coin, but just a generic, of course. X coin, didn't need it. They got listed on exchanges for free, blah, blah, blah. As much as I would love not to take a pre-mine, I am not some person who's launched 3 cryptocurrencies before and has had 5 successful businesses. Really, I don't want to like hope that we'll get free stuff when a small pre-mine. And I truly think that it is a small pre-mine. You know, if anyone says pre-mine's way too big, I'd love to hear those concerns and I'd love to discuss it. So yeah, we're going to go there because they're focusing on cryptocurrencies that haven't done an ICO, and we're not going to do one. I think they're BS. I think they focus on promises, and I'm not about promising stuff. I'm about working on stuff.
Will you have a booth at TabConf, or will you just be going there incognito?
As much as I would love a booth, no, they're really limiting those to the sponsors, and that pre-mine hasn't kicked in just yet. So no, I'll just be listening to the talks. If anyone else is going, I'd love to like meet up though. You know, hit me up.
Okay. Right. So the next community question, it was quite a humorous run, and it starts off quite serious. But the question is, who is on the Ember team? And the second and third part of the questions are: do you feel that you're mature enough to lead the Ember team, and are you better than the skinny guy? I'll leave it to you to explain who the skinny guy is. But let's take the first question first. Who is on the Ember team?
So currently, I am the lead developer. We have, when it comes to the community, the amazing community manager with the username of Memnon. We have a moderator, and then we have 2 developers who are working on a side project of sorts. It is going to make its way into Ember Core, but it's not Ember Core yet. And those are amazing devs. They go by Simon and Quelclef, Simon being his actual name. Who uses their actual name as a username? Weirdos. I know.
Somebody who's very confident.
Simon, if you watch this, no, please still be my friend. So we do have a couple developers on our side project. I'm still the only developer on Ember itself. We have community staff. When it comes to business, because Ember is a cryptocurrency, it's not going to be owned by a business. No business will have control of it. There's never going to be a centralized entity who like gets a veto power. We're not going to do Dash Sports where the owner, I don't want to say the owner of Dash, but I think Duffield, the original person behind Dash, at one point he could rewind the chain 48 hours just by broadcasting a message. It was really just out there. So we're never going to do that, of course. That said, I have been working on forming an American company to provide some protections with the pre-mine, to stop me from just dumping it, and provide some more regulation to actually be able to hire developers, really trying to set up a firm hand behind Ember. Never one that could submit code without access or cause a hard fork or anything, but one that will offer code to the community, work on a block explorer, provide mining pool software, so on and so on. And that I'm still working on picking it. You know, you truly do have to be careful who you put on this, because of course, while the company will never own Ember, they will be involved. So currently the only other staff I've picked is the chief operations officer, with me being the CEO. And for that, you can actually find him on our Discord. Picked a good friend of mine who's really just been there for me since I've known him, and he is already working on some businesses and taking management roles inside of them. His name's Dave. So yeah, he's also going to be there for the more business sides of things.
Excellent.
And he's already helped talking about investors, because we're not going to sell the pre-mine, of course, because that would just basically be an ICO. We are talking about selling business shares, because the business, if it hosts a mining pool, that might be 0.5% or whatever. And it would be nice to get some funds so we could get an audit before we launch, because we could audit after launch, but that's after launch, meaning live money's already at risk. So, yeah.
Sounds very sensible. Sounds very sensible. It'll be interesting to see how your plans for an audit come along. So I guess we'll revisit that in a later episode, or you'll probably put out the information in a Medium post. The next part of the question is, do you feel that you're mature enough to lead such a cutting edge crypto project?
I think that's one of the great things about crypto. I am going to lead back to the question, but I think one of the great things about crypto is, say I go absolutely crazy. I say I am taking 100% of the supply at the start. Miners get nothing, and their incentive is to mine. It's just for the currency itself. Then anyone can fork it. Ember is not a live network. Even if I wrote a crazy hard fork, the people don't have to adopt it. So if at any point the people decide, no, I am not mature enough to lead, then I don't have to be there anymore. It isn't like America, where if I'm not trying to make any comments about the current American leadership, it's just the basis of government I know. But if you want to kick out the president, the people can't. They have to go through parts of our Congress, but they can't even force Congress to do it. They have to elect representatives who promise to, but then they actually have to fulfill their promise. So there's a lot of extra steps there. With cryptocurrency, you just don't have those steps. You don't like someone's code, you just fork it and move on.
Yeah.
So I do think I'm mature enough to lead, but I don't think you have to ask that. And of course, since this comment is really based on my age, since I'm not 18 yet and I'm young, I hope that you don't look at my age. I hope you look at my code, my actions, how I speak, and evaluate based on who I am, not what number is next to me on a piece of paper.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. I do think I have seen before some projects where the block reward goes to a certain person who founded the project, and then some people may just fork the project and remove the block reward and things like that. So that is one of the good things about crypto. I would definitely agree with you. If people don't like the way a certain project is heading, they're free to take it and head it on their own, on the clone of the code in their own direction. So yeah, I agree.
And of course, just as a couple of comments, Zcash did that with Z Classic.
Yes.
And truly, I hate block skims. Because you can argue that if they're at the same rate as the would-be pre-mine, then it doesn't matter for miners, because either way the coins have the same value. Even if they have less of the actual coins, they're at the same value. But honestly, a block skim, I just always feel like it's stealing from the miners, even if it works out in the end, just with the feel of it. Even if our pre-mine does devalue the block reward in like USD, I feel like at least they get it. It just feels ugly. I truly feel a time-locked pre-mine is the best way, and a block skim is just not something I would ever do.
Okay.
There was the third part of this question. The am I better than the skinny guy?
Yes.
So this is a humorous reference to Vitalik Buterin. Oh, real quick, do you remember that there was this, I don't know if it's actually an ICO or if it was a donation, Fiterin? It was like Vitalik Buterin, but to like get him a gym membership and a dietitian. It was just this crazy project. I went around the Ethereum circles a while back, but anyways,
no,
I can't. You can never answer really if one human is better than another. Sure, there's outliers. I think like most people are better than, oh my gosh, just because this name is going to come up, Hitler or whatever. But you can't really say this guy built Ethereum. This guy built Bitcoin, therefore one is better than the other. They're two different things. Ethereum's a world computer, Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Well, you can say Dash is built off of Bitcoin, so therefore Bitcoin must be better. Dash started a wave of governance projects that led rise to PivX. And even if one's technological contributions are better than the other, we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. For all we know, he's this 80-year-old guy who did nothing except release Bitcoin. And this one guy can make a fork, and that fork may be horrible, but for all we know, he works out, he like volunteers at a shelter on the weekends for innocent puppies. It's really, you can't judge a person based solely on their technology. And I can't say that a cryptocurrency project makes me better on the technological scale than someone trying to make a distributed world computer, as he says. We're just different.
All I really got from that is that Satoshi Nakamoto is rescuing helpless kittens somewhere in the world right now.
Oh, why not? I mean, I honestly think we're a group. And if they're a group, they likely have corporate backing. And for all we know, that corporation is BP, who's causing oil spills, and they have a part in it. I don't know. You can think of crazy scenarios all day long. So while I honestly think they're a group with their own funding, like they're a group of successful businessmen or developers who got together, we just can't say one person is better than another solely because of technology.
Yeah.
And
this
it's
is
hard
true.
to quantify this stuff.
This is very true. Okay, moving on. The last question from the community was, what is the strategy behind allowing data transfer on Ember?
The strategy here, it's kind of hard to phrase it as a strategy. So I want to enable second layers. I guess the real thing to come out of this is smart contracts, Ember is definitely more scalable than, say, Bitcoin, but there's still a limit in how far it goes because it still has a blockchain that isn't sharded. And everything goes back to the blockchain. And there's a reason for that, security. So a second layer could enable just more transactions. It could be quote unquote like Bitcoin sidechain, or it could enable smart contracts because I don't believe those should be in a cryptocurrency. So we've done two things to enable second layers. And the first is data nodes. Or entries. Sorry, nodes is a term we got rid of a long time ago because it was confusing with network nodes. So data entries, which is just an entry on the database. And those will allow you to store 256 bytes, and you could use them to define a token protocol. In fact, we've already written out a secure and safe token protocol, and it just works. So you can do that on day one. You could create an Ember token wallet for that. And it's really just enabling second layers, because we don't want smart contracts on the first layer, but I don't want to get rid of them entirely. And then, of course, the other thing we did to enable second layers is data can't affect Ember. So you could say you have 10 Ember on a second layer, but no, you really just can't do that securely. So the other thing we did is called lockboxes, and it's a way of adding rules. So you fund it with Ember, and then there's rules on how you can release it. It's not a full smart contract. It can't just be used for data. There always must be Ember in or out, and there's no loops. You can't say for 1 through 10. There are multiple rules on it, and it's more limited than a smart contract. But it will allow second layer manipulation of first layer Ember without a centralized entity.
Interesting. Lockboxes, does that signify that Ember will be capable of having atomic swaps as well?
Yeah, definitely. It will enable atomic swaps. We're likely going to have it enable multi-sig wallets. And the lockbox engine, the thing that evaluates the rules that are in place, evaluates the data, sees if the rules are in check, that's what the black box is. And I think we've talked about this before, but that's the side project that Clef and Simon are working on. So this black box will become a core part of Ember, but it can be written as an isolated object. And that's how we're handling it for now.
Okay, when Ember does hit mainnet, how will people be able to get their hands on it?
When Ember hits the mainnet, I remember this being another great community question, if I recall correct. Yeah. So there's going to be a few ways. So one, I've already marked out quite a few people to receive Ember, just for helping out, The people who participated in Developer Test Note 1.0, already marked them out for small amounts, of course. It's not like they're going to become millionaires from this. Some people who contributed some code, they've been marked out. Some people who have just helped around chat and been friendly, small amounts. So I've definitely marked out people just for being nice around the community, helping further the project. Beyond that, and that's going to come from the pre-mine, of course. It's going to come from, quote unquote, my part of it, however much I get, because I'm not going to take 100% of the pre-mine and walk away. And then besides just those rewards, there's also mining, which is going to be how I think a lot of people get their Ember at a start. You can start mining as soon as the network launches. There's no whitelist or anything. And I don't know if we're going to pool software at launch, but solo mining will likely be an option for a while, like a week or two, at least. If we wait to release any pool software for the first 2 months, it could remain viable for the first 2 months, because Bitcoin pool software just isn't compatible. And then finally, we also have just buying it on an exchange. I talked about getting on an exchange within the first couple of weeks. And as soon as we are, you can buy it. And we'll probably also set up a Discord channel where you can escrow it. I don't know if that's going to be through admins or we'll talk about how to use lockboxes for that, but no, there's definitely there's likely to be people on Discord trading it.
Excellent. Okay, moving forward, what sorts of things have you got planned for the next month? So what sorts of things can people look forward to seeing over the upcoming month?
I'm really hoping to do both of the testnets this month, the one-day testnet and the developer testnet 2.0. So with that, we're going to see the finished verifications redo merged into master, working, all lighting up green. And then for the second testnet, we're also going to see better syncing. A lot of what was reported in the first testnet was quote unquote lifetime issues. So things weren't getting mined into a block. And because they weren't in a block, they couldn't get synced. And because they weren't getting synced properly, they weren't mined into a block. Because they were only broadcasted at creation and never again. But people missed them upon creation. So that was a major issue we kind of seen. So we're going to really work on fixing that. We're going to work on the database and moving it out of RAM, providing a more long-term option where if you shut it down, you don't have to completely resync. So that's kind of what we're looking on for developer testnet 2.0. So we're looking for the developer testnet 1D, the one-day one, looking at the verifications redo being done. And for 2.0, we're looking at network support, stability, long-term use, so on and so on.
Okay. How are things coming along in terms of timescale? Do you feel that things are coming according to plan? And do you feel that the mainnet will be released around the same time when you predicted and planned for the release?
So December wasn't my favorite month when it comes to work on the code. That said, we got a lot of work done in other places, so that means I'll have more time for the code. And I still feel like things are moving forward in a timely manner. Q4 2018 is over, and one of the things I listed in Q4 is RPC bindings for C++, Node.js, and NIM. So those aren't here just because we don't have the RPC done, because I put that back for the first public testnet. So it's not that I would say we're off track. I would say that we rearranged it and that I have to update it. We're still looking at Q2 2019 for the mainnet.
Okay, brilliant. So just that things are being put around, things are just being developed in a slightly different order to what you'd planned.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So it's not that the mainnet's later or the testnets are later. Things like the RPC that got swapped around.
Okay, fair enough. I guess that's of no consequence to the end user, so that's fine. I guess everybody will be glad to hear that the project is on track and everything's set to be delivered when you'd originally said. Now, finally, where can people go to find out more about yourself and, more importantly, more about Ember?
So when it comes to Ember, we always have our website, embercrypto.io. And then we have our GitHub, which I believe will be in the description, and our Discord, which will also be in the description. The Discord's great because if you join there, you can just get answers to all your questions, our resources, so on. And the GitHub and the Discord are also on our site. Our Twitter and our Medium provides in-depth updates, while our Twitter provides updates as they come in. But of course, we're limited on size. So mainly they're links to other platforms. And then when it comes to myself personally, if you have any interest, I do have a personal Twitter under Kayaba Nerve, all one word, of course.
Right, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kayaba. It's been a riveting podcast. As usual, plenty of information and plenty of updates. Want to particularly thank you for your transparency whilst you're developing Ember. It's really refreshing for everything to be happening in front of us and not so much being hidden away. So it's just a really great project and it's really good watching it develop. So thank you very much for coming on this podcast again, and thank you very much for keeping us up to date with the bi-weekly blogs. And thank you everyone for listening, and be sure to tune in for next month's one. And in the meantime, join the Ember, follow on Twitter, us at SmartReach, and also Ember Crypto and Kayaba. And yes, Kayaba, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. And really, I'll always try my best to be honest on here. I'm never going to lie or really just try to spin it, because the moment I start lying, the whole project's going to lose credibility. So
yeah, that's
honesty
very
is
true.
going to be the best policy, and that's what I'll do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kayaba, and I look forward to speaking to you next month.
Sounds great. I'll talk to you then.
This show is brought to you by PivX Private Instant Verified Transactions. With its groundbreaking zero-coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivx.org.